Welcome to the Wild Enthusiasm for Living podcast. I am your host, Dr. Melissa Mann. Join me for conversations about possibilities and tools for having more joy, more play, and way more of you. What would it be like to wake up every day with a wild enthusiasm for living? Hello and welcome to the Wild Enthusiasm for Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Mann, and I am here today with Megan Ashton, and she is the founder of Unity Breathwork. She is a teacher and facilitator of breathwork. So thank you so much, Megan, for being here with us today.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm excited to be with you.
Me too. I'm so excited for this conversation. So tell me a little bit, what is the breath work that you do? Because I know there's different types of breath work, and what got you into it?
Okay. I would love to talk to that. Is it okay if we just start with a few grounding breaths together before we do anything?
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll invite you, anyone who's listening, to just maybe blink your eyes closed. Maybe place a hand on your heart if that feels nice. And we're going to just take a few rounds of soft, slow breaths in through the nose, deep down into the belly. Allowing these soft breaths to slow our minds down just a little, to connect us to the moment, to our bodies. Maybe just taking in a couple breaths to honor yourself, to be with yourself. To let any inner critic fall away and just feel proud of who you are. Taking 2 more breaths, and then when you're complete, gently blinking your eyes open. Thank you for that. I feel like I need it as much as anybody else, and so it just helps to ground and center and bring me back into the moment.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so you want me to speak a little bit to the type of breath work that I specialize in, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though I teach all the different breathing practices, including what we just did, which is more of a rest and digest type breathing practice that works with the parasympathetic nervous system, my main passion, my main purpose, what I teach others to do primarily is something called conscious connected breath work. And it's an activating practice where you actually purposefully work with the sympathetic nervous system. So that's the fight or flight branch of our nervous system. And we do this because any adverse experiences we've had, any emotionally charged experiences, potentially even traumas, they happen in this sympathetic state. And very often we lose our breath. We don't fully discharge all of that energy, and it just gets stuck in our bodies, and we end up carrying it around. And I always like to think of us all like carrying our own personal stress bucket. And every time something that's not fully processed, it adds another drop to that bucket. So by the time we're adults, most of our buckets are pretty darn full. And then one little drop can make us overwhelmed and triggered and really reacting. And so with connected breathwork, by purposefully activating the sympathetic state and going back into a physiologically similar state as we were in when we had these traumatic or emotional experiences happen, we can actually gain access to these things because everything's stored in our body. And so we can actually start to breathe with them, to feel them, and then to actually start to release them. So we're almost like poking tiny little holes at the bottom of the bucket to start to drain things out so that we can actually create some real lasting change. And so when you do enough of these sessions, it really just starts to kind of reduce your stress load in general. And it helps to get the nervous system out of, a lot of us are either in chronically stressed state or we've gotten so far into the stress that now we're shut down and numb. So it helps to get us out of those modes so that we can be more fluid, and then we can bounce back and forth between sympathetic and parasympathetic in our everyday lives without being overwhelmed, and just to be able to handle things calmer, to respond instead of react. And it also just gives us access to non-ordinary states of consciousness all naturally. That's something that I love. I'm a really big believer. I'm sure you are too, as someone who works with hypnosis. I used to be a clinical hypnotherapist. So I'm a big believer in the subconscious mind and how
Absolutely.
important it is to reprogram it. And we can't just talk in our everyday states of awareness ourselves into change. We
Yep.
can't just tell ourselves we're going to do it different or we're going to give up this habit or addiction. That's not working with 98% of what is driving us. That's our
Yeah.
subconscious. And in this non-ordinary state of awareness that we get to with the connected breathing pattern, we get access to the subconscious programming. And so with the right words by a facilitator and also just your own inner wisdom, it's very much guided by the inner wisdom of each breather. When you get these insights and downloads in this hyperconscious state, they can actually start to take root in your subconscious and start to reprogram them so you can create real lasting change without that cognitive dissonance or the push and pull where your conscious is fighting your subconscious. You can get them into alignment. And I'm just so passionate about it because I had been on a 20-year healing quest before discovering this, trying pretty much everything to get over my bulimia, my alcohol dependency, my tendency to just be numb all the time unless I was drunk, and my running away from problems by travel. So I was just running away from all these things, trying to heal them. And I tried a whole bunch of holistic healing. I became a holistic nutritionist. I did the clinical hypnotherapy. I became a yoga practitioner. I worked with a regular therapist. And then I'd done like 6 ayahuasca ceremonies, and that didn't give me the healing I was looking for. So I thought, I must be broken. Like nothing is working, nothing. And I was just about to give up, and somebody told me to just try this breathing, this connected breathing. And I showed up a skeptic because in my yoga class, if I'm honest, in my yoga training, my least favorite part was the pranayama. I had the mind. I couldn't focus. Trying to focus on the breath bored me. I wasn't at the regulated enough state to even receive the pranayama. So I was like, I don't know about this breath business. So I showed up a skeptic. Within 15 minutes, I was in this deep, non-ordinary state. I was bawling my eyes out, a lifetime of suppressed tears, which I would never usually do with a bunch of humans around me. It was a group practice. But because you're in this non-ordinary state, that conscious gatekeeper shuts down and you get access to the amygdala, which is the emotional processing center, and the hippocampus, which is the memory keeper in the brain. And so all of these memories came back and these emotions came up for feeling. And I finally felt them, and I didn't even realize I was running from them my whole life, that I was using food as a tool to escape them and alcohol to escape them. And so after that first session, I felt like a different human. I felt lighter and freer, more confident, more in flow. And I knew that day I wanted to spend the rest of my life bringing this to the world. And that was about 10 years ago.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. And I think so many people have some version of that story where they've tried so many things and nothing ever seems to quite get them there. And so it's amazing that you found something that changed everything for you and were able to, finally work through the states that were sort of trapped in the subconscious mind and get to actually access them and release them through this breath work. And I love what you said about working in the sympathetic state, because that's not done very often. Most of the things that we do are bring people into their rest and digest state. But I hadn't ever thought about the fact that if it was created in the sympathetic state, that's actually where we need to go back into to move some things. So that's really incredible.
Yeah. And to build on that, so I often use the analogy that, a lot of times everyone's like, yeah, just do this parasympathetic breathing practice, focus on the box breath or the coherence breath. And they're great everyday tools, but they're like Band-Aid solutions because you're not doing anything for the actual stress bucket. So every little drop's going to still put you into overwhelm, and you're going to just have to keep going back to these Band-Aids again and again. Whereas when you are harnessing the sympathetic and you're actually getting to the root cause and processing and releasing these things that you may have been holding on to for years or maybe even since birth, then you don't need to rely on the Band-Aid solutions as much because you just create more equilibrium and you get your nervous system back into a healthy state, and you just have more tolerance for everyday stressors.
That's really incredible. I think the thing that it brings up for me is I think about people who struggle with a lot of trauma or complex trauma, things like that. And, there's a number of, healing modalities and things that say, don't, it's sort of contraindicated if somebody has, a ton of trauma and things like that. So where does this fall in, if somebody has a lot of trauma that's been in their body, can this help them move through it, or will it dysregulate them more? Like where is that line?
So yes, it absolutely can, but it needs to be with someone who's properly trained. And that's, what scares me about this industry is it's a bit of the Wild West. This type of breathing practice really blew up in the last 8 years. So it's not so regulated yet. We do have a governing body called the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance. So if anyone's looking for a facilitator, look for one on there. But you really want to make sure you find someone who's trauma informed and aware of nervous system safety. And when you're in that container, when you're with somebody who is empowering you and understands the importance of agency and of keeping your breathers within something called the window of tolerance, then it's so powerful. And this work inherently is trauma work. So anyone who's like, oh, I'm just giving people this connected breathing practice with the theme of bliss. Well, you know what? Some of your breathers are going to go back to trauma because that's what happens when we're in these non-ordinary states. And in those states, it just becomes such a beautiful pathway for healing trauma, but it needs to be done in a really safe container. And we have a lot of therapists joining our training now because they're realizing that, getting the tools and the awareness is so important with the top-down type talk therapy, but they're noticing that the changes aren't happening. It's still living in the body. They're working with clients for 4 years who now have shame and guilt because they know better and their bodies are still reacting. And so they're actually training in breath work and they're combining the two. And they're like, oh my God, I've seen more changes now in the past month with my clients than I have in the last 5 years. And it's such a beautiful combination to work with the both. And the only thing I would say is if somebody has active PTSD where you're still having flashbacks and other active PTSD symptoms, then it's extra important that you only do it in a one-on-one container with a trauma-informed facilitator so that they can titrate the experience for you to make sure that you're not going into overwhelm. But almost all of us have some level of trauma, and like 98% of us with our trauma can benefit dramatically even in a group container as long as it's well held.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can see how, for certain people, it'd probably be beneficial more so to be, one-on-one with somebody. How do you find it helps with things like, I kind of get the bucket analogy and I like that. And, with stress and maybe even anxiety. What about with people who are sort of chronically depressed or, sort of in a low state? Does this also benefit?
Yes, absolutely. So much of our suffering comes from the stories that we tell ourselves. And a lot of it's, our programming from when we were children. And so when we can get into these non-ordinary states and you have a facilitator sending messages like just remembering who you are, remembering how extraordinary you are, remembering that you are love. And these things can be brought on board. And then also giving them that space to feel all of those trapped feelings that are in their body that are making them depressed. Depression isn't like babies aren't typically born depressed. These are results of things that have happened to us throughout life from being told that we're not enough, from not being affirmed or loved. And in these hyperconscious states, we really encourage everyone to be their own healer and to go back and give themselves what it is that they need. If there's any lost or broken parts of yourself, go back to them, go rescue them, give them what they need. And the amount of insights that can happen as well, just because you're in this non-ordinary state and you're connected to something higher as well. So all of these things working together can really get to the root cause of what's fueling the depression. And, for most people, like very often one session can be life-changing, but if you've had ongoing depression, you're probably going to need 5, 6 sessions, maybe bi-weekly to build on one another. But going back to one of my therapist students, she said she had someone that had treatment-resistant depression for the last 5 years going to therapy. And then he went to 3 group sessions that she held of breath work. And suddenly it's like the fog's lifted, the clouds lifted, and he's like seeing life through colored lenses again. And these are the kinds of stories we hear very often. And it's just amazing. It's so good for so many different mental health conditions, because I'm such a believer that so many of our conditions are rooted in trauma. And so we can give ourselves the space to process and feel it, then these things start to lose their grip on us naturally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And I love that. And, so if somebody goes and, they see color again in life, they're lit up again, is it permanent or do they have to go back every month or does it sort of become like a lifestyle? Like, how does that work?
Everybody's different, like literally different, but typically it's kind of like a lot of people that come to these sessions, even if they've been doing a lot of, wellness research, like reading all the books and doing the talk therapy, they haven't started to work with the layers of the body yet. So they need several sessions to kind of peel back those layers of the onion. And so say after they've done 6 or 7, they get to kind of a really good set point. And then after that, instead of doing it weekly or bi-weekly, it's more of a topper upper. And you just kind of know in your body. Sometimes it's because your outside world gets really chaotic. Suddenly you're going through a divorce, or you lose a job, or you lose a loved one. You're like, okay, I got to go and breathe and give myself this chance to feel this grief or to find forgiveness. And you just know it. Like you start to feel that like everyday bubble of tension and anxiety most of us are living in starts to come back up again. You're like, okay, I got to go breathe. And sometimes you can go 6 months or a year without even needing it. So that's what's kind of cool is, unlike yoga or exercising, which you can't go more than a week or two without noticing that you're starting to go back into that rigid state. The effects really are long lasting. And then you just need some topper up sessions as life brings things your way.
Wow, no, that's great to have an understanding. And I'm thinking we're talking about mental health things. What about physical health? Is there physical benefits for all of this?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we don't have any, like, no one's done direct studies on it. But what I've seen in my thousands of breathers is people sharing afterwards. I couldn't sit cross-legged at the beginning of this class, and somehow now I'm crossing my legs the first time in 20 years. Like, what just happened? Or I've been carrying this kink in my neck, and I've been trying all the physiotherapy and massages, or my lower back, and suddenly I don't feel it anymore. And what they'll often report is in the session itself, during the breathing part, it dials up. So I'm a big believer the body dials up tension in order to process release, just like, the tension and release exercises that people do.
Yeah, sure.
So the body naturally does that in these connected breathwork states. And so if you have older active injuries, it's very common to feel stuff there. And even if you don't even have residual pain from an old injury, you'll feel things there. And it's like the body's doing some extra healing around that area. And then people will often experience just a lessening of their pain or their tension. And as far as immune system, we're creating something called eustress and also hormetic stress. So these are types of positive stress. And in doing so, it actually helps to boost the immune system. And it's boosting the immune system, and also because you're working through stress, and stress is such a big cause of poor immunity. And so we're helping to also reduce inflammation by processing these heavy emotions. And so there's a whole variety of these physical benefits as well.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. That's really amazing. And I realize as we've been talking, I have some sense of what this might look like, but
Yes,
I'm
you've done
sure,
something similar.
sure. And I mean, I can't say it's the exact things. I haven't, done your type of, your sessions, but for the rest of, people listening, can you kind of explain like, what does this actually look like in practice? Just so they might get an image of what is,
Yeah,
what does this look like?
for sure. So firstly, it goes by so many names. So if you've tried something called rebirthing or holotropic breath work, some people call it DMT breathing or 9D breathing, or
Yeah.
conscious connected breath work. It's all the same thing. We're all connected and using a connected breathing pattern without a pause between the inhale and exhale to
Okay.
create these physiological changes and these changes in our brain that allow us this access to these non-ordinary states. And every practitioner or facilitator is going to lead it differently. But a very common way, and the way that I do it, is we start with just an introduction where everybody introduces each other. And this helps for trauma healing too, because a big part of trauma is feeling alone. And so when you can create a community atmosphere and make everyone feel connected, and you get these sharings and you get to hear what's happening for other people, you feel this connection. So the sessions start out with introducing each other, setting an intention, and then I give a very big introduction on this is the technique, this is everything that can happen, because it can create a lot. It's an intense thing. It can create physical and emotional intensity. And then also we empower them with agency. This is how you can use the accelerator or the brake, because the medicine is the breath. So what's beautiful about that is you get to choose the dose. So at any point you can be like, you know what, I'm going to go for a macro dose experience today, or today I want to micro dose. Today I'm just going to have a softer experience. So you always get to choose, and you can play around between both. So sometimes you start to like get really deep into something, and then you're like, this feels like too much. So I'm going to soften the breath and use that break. So we explain all of that before we put them into the breath work. And then 98% of the time, the facilitator is going to have you lie down, close your eyes. Sometimes it's done through the mouth, sometimes through the nose, but the connecting factor is that there is no pause between the inhale and exhale, and it's for an extended duration. For me, I like to give people at least 50 minutes of the connected breathing, because people start to reach their deepest states around 30 minutes in. So if you tried a 30-minute one, I encourage you to try a longer one, because you will get a lot deeper. That's when I always see the big emotions coming up, the big physical releases happening. And it's guided by music. And so the music's going to guide the intensity of the breath, but you just keep that connected breathing pattern the whole time. Most facilitators will give you some cues, some invitations is what I like to say, is that you should never have a facilitator that's pushing you towards catharsis. That's when it gets dangerous. And that they're offering suggestions, like maybe breathing a little faster if that feels safe, maybe opening your mouth a little wider, always suggesting and allowing you to let your inner wisdom guide. And the first 10 minutes or so is usually just resistance. The ego is still active and is trying to talk you out of it. It happens to almost all of us. So I like to warn my breathers about that. But if you can get past that first 10 or so minutes, that's when you go into the non-ordinary state, and then the time flies. And by the end, like an hour of breathing sounds like a really long time, but nobody could believe it was a whole hour. Half of my breathers don't want to come back to normal breath. They're like, we just want to stay out here, Megan. Some people just get, absolute bliss, connection to the divine. They meet their inner child, give them some love. They feel peace. They get these big insights. It's so different for every person every time. Sometimes it's more subtle. Some people actually just don't even know what happened for the last hour, and they just went into this deeply rejuvenating state of thoughtlessness, which, would take 10 years of meditating to ever achieve. And they just feel so rested and relaxed afterwards. And I know they didn't sleep because they're still following my cues. They still sit up when I tell them it's over. Right. And then most of these sessions, at least the ones that are well held, will have a lot of coming back time. So you don't just return to normal breath and sit up because you are in a non-ordinary state. You need to ground and integrate. And usually that coming back music is when everyone feels really good. So no matter what you just went through, you just at this point, you let it all go. You feel so relaxed. You feel so at peace. You kind of like a new lease on life. Like, oh, none of this shit even matters. All that matters is love. And everyone just comes back like a different human. And then we sit up eventually. There's a chance to journal anything. And then there's a sharing circle. And that's really important for integration. I think a lot of wellness modalities are just, here's the modality, now get out the door. And they forget about the integration. And without integration, nothing really sticks. And so the sharing circle is a part of the integration. And then there's some grounding breath. And then people, once they're fully regulated and grounded, will leave. And so that's kind of the structure of what a session looks like. And that's how a lot of facilitators will structure their sessions.
Well, that's really helpful. So thank you for explaining that. And, I think about the times I've done it, and it's mostly been, I guess I did one like cacao ceremony that this was part of. And then I've, done some things online. And I think I was mostly afraid I was going to faint. Is that like a thing that, shows up? Do people actually faint? Does that happen?
No, as long as you don't stand up suddenly. So in my almost 10 years of facilitating, I've never heard of anyone fainting. And for all the other schools I worked with, nobody's ever fainted. But this is something why what we teach is that it's so important to prepare people properly with like that whole, like I'll speak for 15 to 20 minutes on everything that can happen. So that when you do start to feel faint, you're like, okay, Megan warned me I might feel faint, but it's okay. It will go away when I come back to normal breath. Megan warned me about, did you ever get the claw hands? This is very common in connected breathwork where your hands go in a claw shape.
Yeah, I think so. I remember my arms and legs, most of my hands tingle like a lot.
Tingling is so common. For some, it goes right into the hands. They become these big claws, and Hugo tells you, like, if I don't stop now, we're going to have these forever. And so you need to warn the breathers in advance that I promise you will not have these forever. And when you can empower people with information, even if they don't consciously remember it all, a part of them does. And so if it starts to happen, it's like, okay, Megan warned me I might get pins and needles, or I might get the claw hands, or I might feel faint, and that it's okay. It's a part of the process and that I'm safe. And as long as you remain lying down, you are. And we always say, if you need to get up to go to the bathroom, just raise your hand so we can help you get up slowly, because you don't want to stand up quickly, because that could make you feel faint.
Sure. Okay, that's helpful. And what about like if somebody has a heart condition or sort of have a tendency to be what is that, like hypoglycemic or sort of other
I'm glad
things?
You asked, because I think a lot of people think, well, it's just the breath, so it's got to be safe. And I think that's where a lot of practitioners go wrong. They do these shotgun trainings thinking, no, it can't be dangerous, it's the breath. But we're working with an activated nervous system with trauma and the subconscious mind. So this is a big responsibility. And there's actually, I have at least 20, I've created a contraindication glossary, because I noticed that there's a gap. A lot of facilitators would say, these are the contraindications, and nobody explains why or how to work with them. So I have nearly 29 conditions that are actually contraindicated. And it doesn't mean you can't do it. Some of them you can't. So for instance, glaucoma, because it's so risky to increase the blood pressure in your eyes, and because connected breathwork can increase blood pressure, we just don't want to mess with that. Mm-hmm. But with, say, high or low blood pressure that's been controlled with medication, you want the facilitator to know but you can absolutely do a session there. That's
Okay.
not something where you can't. And then there's certain conditions, I categorize them into yellow or red flags. So certain yellow flag conditions where it's like you can join, but typically I have my breathers do it through the mouth.
Hmm.
Because if you think about the physiological changes through a big open mouth versus two tiny nostrils, it's a lot deeper. It's a lot faster. You go in real deep. So if someone has a yellow flag contraindication, I might have them do it through the nostrils, and that's going to actually reduce the intensity by about 50%. But they're still going to get a beautiful experience, and it'll be softer and it'll be safer for them. And someone who maybe also pregnancy, if you're in the second trimester and it's a healthy pregnancy and you have approval from your medical practitioner to partake in an activating breath practice, you can join, but I'd have them do it through the nose. And that again helps to titrate the experience and keep it softer. But yeah, it's really important to make sure you don't have a contraindication and to speak to your facilitator beforehand. I usually just have on my registration form, if you have any health condition, please share what it is below. Because there's certain conditions, even though I have 29, I'm sure there's a health condition I haven't heard of. There's thousands of conditions out there. So there's got to be something obscure. So I don't want them to just think because they don't have these 29 that they're safe. So I'd rather be able to research it and then get back to them before they show up. And so that's really important, is that your facilitator screens for it in advance.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And do you ever have people go into panic?
This is another thing. This is another reason why you need a trauma-informed facilitator, and why it scares me that people are doing like week-long trainings and then throwing people out there, because a lot of the sensations in connected breathwork feel like a panic attack. Yeah. And actually, the only time tetany, which happens in breathwork so often, happens outside of breathwork is very occasionally in plant medicine. I've heard of it happening, or panic attacks. When people start to hyperventilate and they go into panic, they sometimes get the same kind of claw shape that you get in breathwork. So if your facilitator doesn't warn you about it in advance, it doesn't teach you how to reduce the intensity if it feels like too much and empower you to follow your inner wisdom, then you could have a panic attack. And I've had so many breathers that have panic disorder or previous history of panic attacks come to my sessions. And what's amazing is 9 out of 10 times they will say after just the one session with me, that because they went into a similar state, but they did it in this way where they felt like they were in control, they were choosing the breath, and they were empowered the whole time, that they feel like if they were to get the sensations of a panic attack coming on in the future, they'd actually be able to talk themselves off the ledge. And I'm not even making this up. This is like the overwhelming feedback I get from people from one session who have been dealing with panic disorder, is going to those similar states in an empowered way, talking yourself off of it in this non-ordinary state, allows them to like regain that control over their nervous system and really helps it to lose its grip. So it can be incredibly powerful and helpful for panic disorder, but you don't want to be messing around with someone who doesn't have enough experience to hold that safely.
Yeah, I know that totally makes sense. And thank you for clarifying that, because I'm like, wow, that's actually beautiful. And I totally understand why that would work to have, because with panic, people get so feel like they don't have agency. It feels like this
the body's taking over. I can't breathe. I'm getting tense. I can't make it stop.
Yeah. So then having the agency, I imagine, actually, gives them that control back. That's really cool. So I love that. So as I'm listening to you, I'm sure other people are having the same reaction of, where do I find this? How do I do this? And I know a lot of the time, you just mentioned before we started the call that you're in Sayulita, Mexico. And if people are down there or want to come down there, amazing. And if not, where else might they be able to have this kind of experience?
Yeah, so a few ways. Firstly, I do offer retreats 3 times a year in Sayulita. So if you ever want to do a deep dive that offers several of these connected breathwork sessions, plus yoga and other workshops, we do that. But also, I had mentioned earlier, there's a website called the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance, GPBA for short. And they're the global governing body, and you can find qualified practitioners on there who at least have had the baseline training. They're very strict with what needs to be in the curriculum for their practitioners. And aside from that, we don't have a massive global resource for looking up facilitators. On my website, on Unity Breathwork, I have my students who have graduated, who have gone through, my training's known for being one of the most rigorous. It's 450 hours, and not just trauma informed. Trauma is woven into every seminar of our curriculum. We have a trauma therapist who co-teaches the mental health and trauma. So our facilitators are really, really excellent. We have lots of facilitators in the US and Canada, some in New Zealand, Australia, the UK. So you can find that on my website under the glossary of breathworkers. But otherwise, we just want to look for, a connected breathwork facilitator, and just check that they're trauma informed. Ask about their schooling, say sometimes they'll actually put on their website a GPBA badge, and that's always a really good sign.
Good.
Unfortunately, though, a lot of the really highly marketed trainings are very short and not trauma informed, and they're, a couple hundred hours, which is just not enough. So you as the breather need to take responsibility and do your own research and make sure it's trauma informed, and that they did at least a 400-hour training. So even if it's not GPPA certified, was it at least 400 hours as a bare minimum?
Okay, that's great information to have. So, wow, and
Yeah.
that's quite a rigorous training. So, I mean, that's incredible. I suppose at that level, then you're finding people who are really committed to this, and it's, sort
Yes, and
of,
who recognize, how deep this work is, and that it's a responsibility that you just can't learn in 200 hours.
yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So, well, that's beautiful. And
Yeah.
if people are interested in finding you in the world, where is the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, so most of my work and offerings are just right on my website, Unity Breathwork. I do offer free online group sessions several times a year, so you'll find that on there as well, and you can sign up for the next one. And I do screening for every. I don't. The reason I don't do them more often is because I screen every single participant, and I have that registration waiver, and I ask about contraindications, and I follow up if you have one. So there is an opportunity to breathe with me for free, or I actually offer these online, like one-on-ones. So you could have a private session with me, or sometimes partners breathe together, or loved ones. And it's so beautiful to see how connected they are at the end. Even if they're not affectionate, at the very end of the session, I'll often say, if it feels right, maybe reaching out to your loved one and holding their hand. And then they do. And it's just like, you just see this like gratitude for one another wash over each other's faces. Couples will say, I finally understand her perspective. Somehow I just got this insight in this other state. And it's just like, I feel like couples that breathe together stay together. So that's another beautiful thing. Maybe get that for your partner as a gift.
I love that. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
And then
Well,
I'm also on
wonderful.
Instagram. I don't use it as much, but you can also find me just at Unity Breathwork on Instagram.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being on. Is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with before we finish up?
I just want everyone to know that I feel like we're always looking outside of ourselves for the answers and for the healing that we seek. And I'm just such a big believer that like all of the healing that we're looking for, it's within us. And we just need to give ourselves that space to feel and to connect. And the breath really is our most powerful medicine. And so I just really encourage you to try connected breath work in any capacity that you can, and experience, that deep connection to your inner wisdom and your inner healer.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Megan. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you somewhere in the world sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and everybody else.